Hello, my name's Andy Biggs, Chairman of the House Freedom Caucus. We're here today to discuss a couple of very important issues. We've got with us, joining me today is Senator Mike Lee from Utah, great state of Utah, Alex Mooney from West Virginia, Lauren Boebert from Colorado, and Louis Gohmert from Texas. And we're glad you would join us as well. We've got two topics that we think are just so important to the freedom or the continuing freedom of this country. First of all, is the mandate on vaccinations that the Biden administration is attempting to impose upon every American. And then secondly, is this massive spending bill. Nobody can really tell us how much money is in there, but there's a lot. And a lot of bad policy that will endure long beyond the ramifications of the spending. But first, let's talk about Senator Lee. You've got a great idea on how to maybe slow down the vax mandate. Tell us a little bit about it, please.
Yeah. Andy, it's important to remember that the federal government doesn't have the power to impose a vaccine mandate on the general population. It just doesn't have the power at all. Even if we did, which we don't, certainly the President of the United States acting unilaterally may not do this. And there's no statute, there's no provision of the Constitution that suggests otherwise. So he doesn't have the power to do this. So the question is, what can we do about it? Well, every part of the government, including OSHA, the agency that we expect to be in charge of enforcing the mandate, relies on funding from the federal government. And that funding has to come through Congress. No agency can appropriate its own funds. We have to do that for them. We're going to have a chance in early December to fund or not fund the government. We've already got a bill filed as an amendment to the last continuing resolution, the last big spending bill by Congress a few weeks ago. Roger Marshall, the senator from Kansas, introduced this great amendment to the last spending bill saying, we don't allow you to spend any money, devote any resources within OSHA or the Department of Labor on enforcing a vaccine mandate. All 50 Republicans voted for it. Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia initially voted for it and then changed his vote to no at the last minute, showing that there are cracks of support there. And the vaccine mandate has become even more unpopular since then. So we're pushing to have the Marshall Amendment come up again in connection with the next spending bill, encouraging every Republican to insist on it. We have no business funding OSHA or the Department of Labor without a requirement that they must not, they cannot, will not be allowed under law to enforce the vaccine mandate.
It's really a clever procedural move that I'm hoping it works. Alex, comment.
Well, as a West Virginian, I think they love freedom in our state, and I'll have to encourage my constituents to contact Senator Manchin and keep with his first vote. If you get 51 votes, you solve it. I hear this a lot, both from federal employees, some of which are in my district, afraid of losing their jobs if they have a vaccination mandate that violates their conscience or, frankly, even their health needs. Mm-hmm. So it's a great concern. I'm glad to hear the senator point out that government doesn't have a right to do that. We actually have to authorize that. Mm-hmm. There's too much fear and belief that the government can just tell you what to do, and they don't have that right. And so we're at a point now where a lot of folks are, for various reasons that are justifiable, not wanting to get vaccinated, and they don't want to be punished for it, and we need to protect them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Lauren, tell us about your district and then how Senator Lee's plan might work.
I think this is brilliant. First of all, it's a pleasure to see us moving from defund the police to defund the government. Because I mean, this is really where we're at. Democrats were shouting in the streets to defund police, so we wouldn't have a way to protect ourselves. But this actually makes sense. Defund Department of Labor and OSHA if they don't reverse this, and if they put in these mandates. I have people all throughout my district coming to me on a regular basis saying, what am I going to do? Police officers, people who work for the federal government, contractors through the federal government, asking me on a regular basis, what am I going to do? They're saying they're giving me a choice, but I don't have a choice. I'm not going to be able to provide for my family. And so I'm so glad that we actually have a tool here, a procedural tool to stop this. Parents have been standing up against schools, even though Attorney General Garland would label them domestic terrorists. But they have been taking a stand. We have seen airline workers with Southwest Airlines, with United Airlines. We're even seeing In-N-Out Burger taking a stand against these mandates. And now we here in Congress can do something to stand up for Americans as well. So I love this amendment, and I love the direction that we're going.
Louis.
to you.
Well, I think one of the greatest developments in medical science and healthcare actually was what's called informed consent, and that is the doctrine by which before a physician or healthcare provider can do a procedure, you must be advised, normally in writing, of all the risks inherent to that procedure, and then get your informed consent so they can go forward. This just blows right past that. They don't, President Biden doesn't know you, doesn't know your physical abnormalities or quirks or different things. And I've had a couple of constituents tell me of family members that got the vaccination and then died. And when they were opened up, they were full of blood clots, which is one of the risks. Well, you ought to be able to consult with your physician about the different risks of the different vaccine and make your decision. But as we were talking, one of the things occurred to me, having been in the Army and you know, we were told we should get flu shots. My last year I didn't, but and was better off. But what about enforcement in the military? We have been losing military people, and my office, I'm sure y'all's offices have been hearing from people in the military saying, we've been ordered to take this drug, take the vaccination, and we know from what happened after the horrendous Tuskegee experiments, I've got to look back, but I was under the impression a law was passed that prevented the military from ever having anybody take experimental drugs against their will. And until the Pfizer vaccine comes out next year that's been approved, these are experimental drugs. So I'm wondering if the government's even entitled to order military people to take an experimental or emergency use authorization.
Yeah, I learned of this argument for the first time just in the last few days. It is an interesting, potentially very promising theory. The president's authority from a constitutional standpoint is much stronger generally when it comes to directives for members of the armed services. If there's a statute on that that prohibits that, it might be an important hook. But even if that were not the case, I think for prudential reasons, the president certainly ought to allow exemptions for military personnel who have a good faith medical concern or a sincerely held religious or other personal belief that would stop them from doing this or something like that. So I think that one is worth exploring as well. And I've got a separate piece of legislation. I've been going to the Senate floor every day we've been in session, offering up different pieces of legislation, one creating a religious exemption, one creating an exemption for people with medical conditions or natural immunity, another designed to protect our armed services personnel, and I think we ought to do that. The really nasty thing about all this really is the most egregious act of presidential overreach that we've seen since the 1950s when Harry Truman unilaterally seized every steel mill in America to support the Korean War effort. The Supreme Court smacked him down appropriately. He doesn't have the power to do that. People always ask me, why can't the courts just do that here? Well, I think in time they will. The problem is they can't act now because there's not even a mandate in effect. Right. He hasn't had the decency to give us the document, so we don't know what his theory is. There's nothing to enjoin for the courts. President Biden is using corporate America to do his dirty work for him. They're then going out under the threat of eventually being fined. They're adopting really aggressive policies. They're firing people. Often what they do is put them on unpaid administrative leave so they can't even get unemployment. Yes. This is disgraceful. It's immoral to tell hardworking mom or dad, you're not going to be able to provide bread on your table for your children if you don't do what we say.
And so Mike,
so Mike, you're 100% correct. And as you've come up with this really appropriate response legislatively, because a lot of times our hands are tied because we don't have police power. We're the executive, we're the legislative branch. What can the American people, anybody who's watching today or who will watch this in the future, what can they do to move the ball forward, help you move the ball forward on your legislative plan?
Tell your members of Congress, especially your senators, support the Marshall Amendment. Don't fund that part of government, any part of government, charged with enforcing the Biden vaccine mandate. Don't do it. Now, and this call goes out to everyone, regardless of how they feel about the vaccine. Look, I'm for the vaccine. I got the vaccine. Some are calling it the Trump vaccine. Call it whatever you want. I think it's a great development. It's a medical miracle of some sort. That doesn't mean government has any business mandating it. I think it's generally safe for most people, but it's not the federal government's position to tell people they've got to choose between working and providing for their family or getting medical treatment that they may not want.
Yeah, it is overreach. And I'll just make a comment before I get to you, Louis. When you said this is the most egregious since the 1950s, I view this as the tip of the point of the spear in a fascist state, because what's happening is this move to get the private sector, before we actually even see an official mandate, you're saying to the private sector, you have to impose this, and they're responding. And that nothing can be more clearly tyrannical than to get the private sector to compel you to do something at the risk of losing your livelihood and your means of support and the way you live.
So responding out of fear based on future threatened action.
Right.
Action that happens to be unconstitutional.
That's right.
That's not acceptable.
That's right. Louis.
Well, I was out to add to what you guys were saying. I was told by a state representative that if you have a private employer in Texas mandate that you get the vaccination or you're fired, and you get the vaccination and you're disabled or even killed, because that is happening, you're not even covered by workers' comp. The insurance is not covering them. I mean, how horrible is that? You're not even covered if you comply to keep your employment and you're disabled.
Yeah. Mike, Senator Lee, thanks for
Thank
being
you,
here.
Senator.
Thanks for your
Thank you very much.
I know you got to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
No, Louis, you raise another issue. We'll cover that some more at another time. Let's segue into this because Senator Lee's talking about using funding to maybe stop a bad policy program. We know that our colleagues across the aisle, they want to use the continuing resolution, a short-term spending resolution, massive amounts of money. Now we're joined by Scott